Alright, so we've got this sample here. First thing I need to do though is warp it.
All of this stuff is probably going to be like an intro. So right here, this will be the part that I'm going to actually use. You can tell it kind of speeds up and slows down, which is going to be no good for adding drums to it.
So probably going to pick something from in there, so I don't really luckily need to warp much more than that. So I pulled it in and it warped automatically, or at least warp turned on automatically, and then I shut it off. When you turn it back on a clip, it does ask you about the clip's current timing. Choose yes to insert warp markers such that the clip retains its current timing, or choose no to revert to the previous set of warp markers. So I don't really care. It's fine how it is. I can hit yes and it just leaves it alone. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go into the very beginning of the audio. You can see Live has decided it's right about here. It goes a little bit further over there, but it's so quiet at this point. I can actually probably use their recommendation. So we're going to double click and make the warp marker. Right click on that. Set 111 to here. Right click on that again and warp from here straight. Now we want to look at things like this. Here, for instance, everything kind of looks like it's almost where it needs to be. I'm just going to turn on the metronome and give it a listen and see what we need to move around. So this note in here, boom. I think that is going to be a good place for a 1. And so if you notice here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 measures, and then this would be our 1. So it would make sense that that would be right there. All this is pretty cool, but it's like just not a lot of strict timing stuff going on here. So it might be cool to play that at the beginning of the song, but then what we're going to actually loop is going to have something that has a little bit more consistency to it. So in here is where we're going to do that. We might actually have to create some of that consistency. So anytime you hear an obvious beginning of a measure and it happens to sit next to the perfect place like this, like 17. 17 is the 1 after the 16th measure. It's like too perfect. Gotta go with that. Same thing, I just heard a cymbal in there. I want to make sure that cymbal, generally it's going to hit on, like right on beat. Not always, but it's pretty good to assume that. just those few minor changes made a massive deal right there. You can almost kind of totally rearrange just through using warping and adjusting the warp markers. You can almost completely rearrange the entirety of how this person constructed this song to begin with. Okay, so that should be enough for now. We can actually just probably cut it here and sometimes I like to make a separation. Just put the cursor there and hit Command E to separate, and then we can know that you know, these two things go together, but they are going to be used for two different things. So this part we can chop up and put a beat over. And this part we can use as some sort of intro, basically. So yeah, next we'll go over, we'll put a beat to this, something like. Drums are what I wanted to focus on next. However, once I began the process, I realized that I have in here a drum rack that I call the Monster Chopper Rack. It's basically just a device or a series of devices, technically, that I put together, not just for drums, more specifically actually for chopping up samples. And so I kind of figured, instead of just moving on with the production process, I would stop for a minute and kind of go into this drum rack and how I created it, why I created it the way I did, and basically just kind of go through the process of creating it so that you guys could make something similar at home, custom to your wants and needs, not necessarily exactly like this one. So I figured that's what we'll do on this one. We'll talk about that, and then we can go in and maybe make the drums as well. So within every drum rack, whenever you drop a sample in, it automatically pulls up this device here, a simpler instrument. The simpler itself has a bunch of different settings on it, and if I drop a sample into a bunch of these pads like this, I end up having to go in and make adjustments to this. So I decided to make a simpler that's already has all of the adjustments the way that I want it. So generally, when I'm chopping samples into a drum rack such as this, the way that I like it set up is as such. So if I drop this sample in here, here is the simpler that it pulls up. So as you can see, it comes up in one-shot mode, and volume is set to -12, where velocity is set to 45%. So generally, when I'm chopping samples, I like to have there not be any velocity. Velocity is good for me when I'm making drum beats, but not so much when I'm chopping samples. Usually want them all to be as close to one another volume-wise as possible. So I always end up having to turn the velocity down, and then I end up having to turn the volume up just to 0. If I click on classic here, I get a whole other list of options. It's set automatically to 3 voices, and I usually keep it at 1 because when I'm chopping samples, I want them to only play one chop at a time. I generally don't want the samples to be overlapping with one another. And then if you look over here at the attack, decay, sustain, release settings, usually I have to adjust these as well. As you can see, release is on 60 seconds. So that means when I press the key, I let go, and it's still playing. It's not really ideal for when I'm chopping samples. So what I usually do is leave the attack where it is at 0, turn the decay all the way up, sustain all the way up, and then the release, I usually turn, if not all the way down, just super far down. That way when I push the key and I let go, it stops. As you can see, when I turn it all the way down, the stopping of it is extremely abrupt. If I leave a little bit, there's a slight tail to it. So that's an adjustment that I would make based on the situation. So volume 0, release down, sustain up, decay all the way up. Voice 1, retrigger mode, usually fine. And so that's it. It's really simple. Not a whole lot of changes. However, just enough to where if I were to drag this sample into a bunch of these different pads, then I would have to go in to each one of those samplers individually and make these small changes, which is kind of a pain in the ass. So that's why I've saved one here already called Choppin' No Release. Basically that means that I've got a sampler that I have adjusted how I want, with the release turned down, volume turned up, and the velocity turned down. And then after I got that, then I come over here and click save. And as you can see, it comes up over here under Simpler, which is user library. And then when you go to user library, then you'll have presets here. And then it's under instruments, since it's a simpler. You find a simpler, and then there's your presets. Now I'm going to get rid of this because I don't actually need it. But I do have this one here called Choppin' No Release, which is basically just the exact one that I made. Okay, so once you have your simpler saved how you want it, the next thing would be to create a drum rack. So go to Instruments, and then bring a drum rack on there. The amount of pads on the drum rack that you're going to use is going to vary situationally, obviously. Depends on how many pieces of the sample you're actually chopping up. Just to make sure that I have more than enough, I've gone ahead and put this Choppin' No Release simpler onto every single one of those pads. Okay, you don't have to keep dragging like I just did. If you want, you can click on the pad and then hold down the Alt or Option key and then just drag it over. So there's another quick way of filling up these pads. I'm just holding down the Alt Option key. Now this is all filled up with the Choppin' No Release simpler that I like. You'll see that I have one here called Custom Choppin'. This includes some effect macros, but we're not going to talk about that just this second, so I'm going to ignore that. The Custom Choppin', what I've done now is what I said, which was what I just did, putting the Choppin' No Release simpler onto each one of these pads. And then I took it a step further. I opened up this button here, I/O, and on every one of these simpler instruments, you can adjust the choke group. Put them all on the same choke group. They're going to come as none. So what you want to do is select one and then Command A to select all, and then change them all to the same choke group. Choke group 1 is just fine. Now, for those of you who don't know, what that does is make it more or less mimic what an MPC would do. In an MPC, you can set up choke groups. Choke basically means that when you play one button and then the next button, whatever is playing on the previous button immediately stops and gets choked out by the currently playing pad. So if I put this sample into here, then when I play this one, when I go to the next one, so I'm still holding this down. When I push the first one, holding it down, and I'm going to push the next one while still holding this one down. As you can see, it stopped the previous one and is now playing the other one that I'm holding down. So it chokes out the previous playing one even if you still have your finger on it. This means that you're going to get extremely smooth transitions from pad to pad. You're never going to have them overlapping each other, if even for a second. Super handy for chopping up samples such as this, where basically what we would do is just go and find a start point. So as you can see, very effective for this type of situation. So once you have all of the samplers that you made loaded in to a group of 16, and then you've gone in and set the choke group, then you can come over here and you're going to want to use this save button. That save button is going to save the drum rack itself under the same thing: user library, presets, instruments, drum rack. And then you can call that whatever you want. Now, whenever you load in that drum rack, it will be all ready to go with the choke set up and everything. Okay, so then the next thing that I did, as you can see on here, I have these macros set up to control certain effects. So let me demonstrate how that works. So what I've chosen to put on here is and will be probably completely different than what you will choose to put on. Personally, I've put an erosion on here. The reason I've done that is because I like to make lo-fi hip-hop, and so giving it the erosion effect kind of creates a little bit of that lo-fi character on things, especially when I combine it with this filter cutoff. So on top of the erosion, the amount, the erosion frequency, the filter cutoff, I've also got a compressor on here. I can adjust the dry wet with the compressor and also the threshold. Okay, so let's get into how exactly we do that. So on your MIDI track that you've been using to create your device here, what you're going to want to do is go to Audio Effects and then bring down an Audio Effect Rack. Audio Effect Rack is basically just that, an empty rack for effects. Within this, you can put whatever you want. So the first thing that I put in mine was an erosion. So we just drop an erosion in there. And then after that, I put the filter. So you just drop an auto filter after it. Make sure that you're putting it in the rack and not to the side of it. And then after that, a compressor. And then what I've done is open up the macro knobs on the effect rack. And this is where you're going to assign the various parameters of whatever effects you've chosen to the various macro knobs. So for the erosion here, you're going to want to just kind of mess around with it. If you want to use the sine or wide noise. So what you do is you're going to hit the map key and then you're going to adjust the parameters. So we want to adjust the amount here. You just click amount and then click map and then it'll map it there. It'll automatically name it, but you might want to name it a little more detailed. So hit Command R and put like erode amount. And then the other thing that you control here is the frequency. So click on frequency and then click map. And then again, Command R and be more specific, erode frequency. You can just check that. Okay, then the auto filter. Same type of thing. Generally what you end up controlling here is the frequency. So we can just map the frequency, click the frequency knob, and then click map on whichever macro. Command R, be more specific, filter frequency. And then here on the compressor, you might want to get to another setting here, or just another view. Let's bring the knee all the way down. And then what I've done is just set up the compressor to react how I would want. So generally I like to use it to give me a little more loudness. In that situation, usually you want like a longer attack time and a shorter release time. And then the ratio doesn't have to be too high, even just 3:1. And then what's really going to control that is going to be the threshold. So we've got this playing. I bring the threshold down. As you can see, that really boosts it. So I want to map this threshold knob for sure. Map threshold, and then we'll choose a macro. Again, I want to specifically name it, so Command R, put comp thresh. And then macro 4, what I like is the dry wet knob. So this is going to give you the ability to do some, what's that called? The ability to mix the amount of compressed signal with uncompressed signal simply by using the dry wet knob. You have that all the way to 100, it's going to be fully compressed signal. If you turn it all the way down, it's going to be no compressed signal, and then you can get your little mixture of compressed and uncompressed. So as you can see, with the erosion on and the filter working together, it gives you kind of a lo-fi, kind of degrades the sound a little bit, not overwhelmingly though. And the sine setting is more like a bit crusher. And now you can add whatever else you want here. It's completely up to you. I only have these things on here for this particular device because I'm using it mostly for lo-fi. So, you know, if you want other things, you know, special reverbs, you can do that as well. You can even go in and with all the specific changes that you make to the individual effects, you can save the individual effects. Like your own custom erosion, your own custom auto filter, your own custom compressor, all those things. But if you're happy with the rack that you've created, then you need to hit save on the actual effect rack itself. When you hit save on it, it will bring it to the same place, user library, presets, this time under audio effects and audio effect rack. And then this is where you would name it. Command R, call it whatever you want. I'm going to delete that because I don't need that at the moment. But here's my audio effect rack that I made. It works great on this channel right now. However, there are macros on the drum rack itself, and so how do you get these things to work with your effects over here? What you need to do is, right here, you can see where it says drop devices here. So that's where you're actually going to put it. Now before you do this, if you have any samples in here like I do, you might want to clear those out and just move your chopping or whatever back into there. Because we are going to be saving this, so you want to be sure that there's not samples loaded in there every time you drag it on here. Once you have this effect rack saved, down here where it says drop devices here, that's where we're actually going to put it. So you want to click the R for return, and then you can drop your effect rack in there. I'm literally going to drag it over from there, or you can drag it in from up here. Okay, so now I have the audio effect rack here. And as you can see, it's now combined into this actual drum rack. When I click on the drum rack itself, you can see it highlights everything, all these effects now. Now you want to get all these controls to work over here, because this stuff isn't going to be open while you're actually messing with it. Once you open your sample back up, as you can see, boom, the effect rack disappears. So you want to be able to control your effect rack with these knobs. So you're just going to go map over here, and then you can grab these and map here, erode frequency, map, compressor threshold, compressor dry wet, map, filter frequency, reverb dry wet. I have to go in and make sure that these are renamed, because yours isn't going to do that. Mine is, because I already had these things named and set up for a separate effect rack. Let me just go in and rename real quick. And you can see, you can test it by, when I turn this macro 5, you can see the compressor dry wet over here being moved. And just make sure everything works as it's supposed to. Once that's all going, you're almost good to go. The only thing that's left is right here where you see send A. You just want to make sure they're all turned up. Now, you can still hear the sample being played cleanly and through the effect rack. If you only want to hear it being processed through the effects, then you would just hit solo here. As you can see, that gives you a 100% processed sound. So if I turn the filter all the way down, you can no longer hear it. Otherwise, let me show you the difference. Take this off solo. If I turn the filter all the way down, you're still getting signal. And once you've done all that, then you come here and you hit save. And now that's going to save it for you under user library, presets, instruments, drum rack. Boom. So I'm going to delete mine because I don't need it, because I already have one. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you can make your own preset drum rack for chopping up samples, or you can even make one specifically for drums or whatever you want to do. On the next one, we'll go ahead and build the drums for this sample that we've got here. Basically, I selected a sample, and in order to get it ready for reusing in any fashion, I had to do some time warping on it. Basically got it all warped here to where it will play nicely over a click track, and we can make a drum beat over it, like so. So anyways, I've got a folder here linked up through Ableton's browser that I've been digging on lately, and so we're just going to find kick, snare, and hat, real simple. I'm just going to move the start point of this sampler to here. So the kick, let's see if there's anything we need to change. So right off the bat, it's a little too long for me. So I kind of want to make it more like a quick thud kind of. That's good. Maybe turn the velocity up a little bit. Okay, so one major thing, we made this drum rack for chopping samples in the last tutorial. If you saw it, then you'll know that we set up choke groups on here. When you're working with drums, a choke group is not really going to work because if any of these two drums hit at the same time, they're going to try to choke each other out. So we're going to put this to none, put this to none, and put that to none. Okay, so anyways, our snare. Let's see here, with this snare, let's turn the release up so we get all that crackle at the end. Let's try and maybe pitch it down 1 or 2 semitones. Keep that at C. I don't know if you can hear that tone. So that would be an F. Forgive me for my ridiculous singing. A singer I am not. However, I do use that kind of technique for checking pitch. So, okay, so one cool thing about the rack that we set up earlier, it does have some effects on here that I am going to probably find useful for Lofi. Now, I want to make sure that the drums are going through the effects rack that I have on this, and only through that. Like right now, it'll be a mixture of dry and wet. So, for instance, if I bring this cutoff filter down, you can hear it working, but it's also letting the clean signal through. So if I come down here to where my effect rack is in my sends on the drum rack, I can hit the solo button. And now it's only going through the effect rack fully. A lot of the time, you can achieve the drum sound by using filters. It's also really nice to have this compressor on here, so let's kind of mess with that. I'm gonna play around with the drums and play around with some of the sounds and see if we can get a nice sound, and then maybe we can lay a beat down. I think we could make it even better if we were to use the filter cutoff. possibly on this snare I could add a little bit of a reverb. So I'm actually pretty happy with that drum sound overall. I think I'm just going to go ahead and lay some drums down. As long as I don't have this plus sign turned on, then I can keep on looping the drum pattern that I play over and over here. Then when I'm done, I can actually just pull it out as long as I want it. So let's go ahead and record a drum pattern then. We'll turn the click track on this time and let's see what we can record. Okay, so your thought might be, wow, that's a lot of drum. Why do we have all that? Well, because there's a lot of screw ups in there and there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I want to be able to comb through it and find the shit that I really like and the shit that I really hate. Throw away the shit that I hate, keep the shit that I really like. Make different combinations of the things that I do like, so that way I don't have just the same exact drum beat going all the way through. This way we can have some changes, but all of it will be stuff that I like. So unfortunately, that means I am going to have to sit here and listen through all of it and delete the shit that I don't like and keep the shit that I do and kind of build my own based off of that stuff. But I will do that on the next video. I have all this drum data here and probably copy and paste it into new pieces. Let's see here, we left off on the last video, we just recorded drums basically. We found our drum sound and then I basically looped this melodic part over and over while I played drums over it by hand. And now I'm basically going to go in and listen to this entire drum section piece by piece and find all the little parts where it sounds messed up to me and get rid of it. And all the parts that sound good, I'm going to keep it. And then I'm going to basically copy and paste it into one segment. So all the garbage will be gone and all the perfect happy accident type of takes will all be there. And they'll all be combined into one perfect drum take. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the goal. It's going to be a little tedious to watch, so I will just put this in fast forward while we do that. So fixing all obvious issues means just that, anything that was off time, I slide it into time. Maybe I hit the wrong note there or something, so I'll just delete that note. Every time a section is completed, I make a notation off to the side, and I put that section that's completed next to that notation. This is so I don't get parts confused and mixed up with each other. Rinse and repeat just means I just do this over and over. I go through everything, fix a section, get that section completed to where I'm happy with it, make another little note, and then I take that piece that's done and I move it out of the way. Again, going through, fixing notes, things that are out of time, putting them in time, getting rid of mistakes. So yeah, the notes are to avoid confusion, and then on top of that, I also delete stuff that I've completed. I keep the fixed thing off to the left and then delete the other stuff. Hopefully this is making sense by now. Basically, the point of this is to take all of these leftover parts and combine them all together. So yeah, now I have all these drum parts, and to make sure that I don't put them in the wrong place, because each part is supposed to play over a specific piece of the music. So yeah, I put the music off over to the side, and then I move the drum parts around to where they're supposed to be, forming a completed section. Yet again, another step to avoid confusion is the color coding. So even here, I'm still finding things that I don't like and fixing them. Sometimes when I put two individual sections together into one, they don't exactly fit perfectly with each other. Like, it doesn't go seamlessly from one part to the next. So I'll have to go in and fix that as well. I'm just doing this to just kind of clean everything up, make it nice and simple and obvious. So there we have two completed drum sections. It plays all the way over the entire piece of music we have there.
They're both green, signifying that they're complete, but they're different shades of green because they're not exactly the same as one another. They're both actually individual. I know it's kind of a weird way to do things. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for everyone. But yeah, that's oftentimes how I do things. Now, if you're an awesome finger drummer, then you wouldn't have to do this kind of thing. I'm only doing all this crazy shit because I'm not really very good at finger drumming. I just do my best, and then I gotta do what I gotta do to make sure that it sounds good after that.
Okay, so I've got all the good pieces, all the pieces that worked. I've put them all together, and then I've consolidated them all into part A and part B. So I have two different parts to work with. They're both a little bit different from each other, so we never get bored because there's always something a little bit different happening. Okay, so we have part A and part B to work with. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to take this track and I'm going to do a technique that I've done in another video. I want to highlight that here as well. Essentially, we go and look at this and we see that we have, basically this drum beat is just a kick, a hat, and a snare. That's all that there is to this particular one. So I'm actually going to separate this drum beat into its different sounds. So the way I'm going to do that is quite simple. I'm just going to take this track, I'm going to duplicate. So now I have 3 of this exact same track, okay? I'm going to go into this first one. I'm going to take this kick, I'm going to solo it. Then I'm going to rename this kick. And you see what I'm doing here. Now on this one, I'm going to go into hat. Yeah, it's a hat. I'm going to solo that hat. I'm going to name that hat. I'm going to go here, and you got it, snare, solo, rename, snare. Okay. So this is what I like to do every time. That way I have pure control over every single aspect.
So we had to go in and solo the effect rack, the bottom solo button in the rack. So when we actually soloed the snare, for instance, right here we've got a snare track pulled up. When I hit solo on the snare pad, it unsoloed the effect rack. So now we have that dry and wet signal both coming through at the same time, and they're coming through on all 3 of these tracks, so it's going to be a problem. Now, one way to fix that is to actually just delete all the other MIDI notes. So instead of soloing the kick, for instance, we would want to just delete everything but the kick. So we just got to go over here to the piano roll and find the kick.
Kick here. So you can select the snare and delete, select the hat and delete. Same on this clip. Select the snare, delete, select the hat, delete. You got the kick. And then same here, this is the hat track. So I'm even going in here and changing the color coding on them. That way they're all drums, they're all a shade of blue, but they're all a different color. Okay, so
just in case anybody out there is like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? I'm going to just kind of briefly go over and illustrate exactly what it is that I'm talking about.
Okay, so this filter cutoff is at about 4.60. Now, when the snare is playing, if I turn this all the way down, because this is a low pass filter, if I turn this all the way down, it should kill it completely. So as you can hear, we still have the snare now coming through this chain here. So the other good thing about what we did here by deleting all these other drums and just leaving only, say, the snare there and only the hat here and only the kick here, when we've got this soloed, it's going to also solo here. So these two things are connected, right? What we would do to alleviate that is to solo this rack. Okay, so now it's only the snare because that's all that's in this MIDI clip, and it's running through the rack only. See, as you can see, bring that filter down and you can't hear it at all. So that's going to give us an actual, like, way more control over each individual drum sound. I just kind of was making sure, seeing where this was tuned to and where the kick was tuned to, and it's funny, I was pitching it around and it didn't need it. This was actually in the right spot the whole time, so. compressing these drums. I like to run the drums through a drum bus, just kind of glue them all together with some compression. So I think that's about it for this. Next time, what we'll do, we'll give this another listen and probably add some bass to it, maybe some electric guitar. I'm not really sure at this point. Stick around, we'll find out. The last video we made, we had basically finalized this drum beat here. This video, we're going to actually work on a bass line. So as you see here on this track, I've got a couple of different VSTs going. The first one here is this Universal Audio 1176. I basically have it set to pretty much, it's like a extremely hard compression, almost basically limiting. So that's just there to smooth out the peaks, since I am going to be using a real actual Fender jazz bass here. So I'm going to run first through this 1176, and then I've got after that an instance here of Guitar Rig. I just used a preset under bass amps called Finger Bass Deep as a starting point, and then went ahead and made some minor adjustments here. This particular bass guitar that I'm using is rather bright, so as you can see on this graphic EQ here, all of the really high frequencies are all the way down. Not until about 1K is the frequency actually up. And then here on this preamp that they have, you've got the gain, drive, bass is up 3.8 dBs, mids are all the way down here, and then here you adjust where the mid, like which frequency of the mid you're actually adjusting. So again, that's all the way down, and then the treble is turned down a little bit, but still present. So yeah, so we got ourselves a bass sound, and I've got this little piece selected here. I've got loop on. I'm going to play the bass and record my playing, and I'm going to let this loop, and I'm going to do, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 loops and just let it keep on rolling. The cool thing is when you record in Ableton with the loop going, after you're done, you can pull it out like this, and basically you have it all as if you were doing simultaneous take after take, and then you can kind of go through and pick out the good parts and throw away the garbage. Now when I am recording the bass, I'm not going to be able to also simultaneously record the microphone. Unfortunately, the microphone that I'm using is a USB mic, so here in preferences for the audio input device in Ableton, I have to have it set to this Yeti Blue USB microphone in order to use the microphone. When I track the bass, I'm going to have to set this to my UA Apollo Twin, because that's what the bass is going to be going into. So when I'm tracking, I will not be able to talk. I am going to film with a separate camera. I will film the bass so you guys can see the bass line being played, and I'll probably be able to talk into that microphone, so if I need to say anything, I'll just use that. I do have like a rough general idea of what I'm gonna do musically with the bass, so hopefully you guys won't have to endure me recording over and over and over trying to get a good take. Like I said, I'm just going to probably loop it maybe 4 times or something. I think that should be enough for me to get a good take out of it. And if I don't get one good take, then I'll chop up the parts of the 4 takes and piece together one good take. It's studio magic, why not, right? This here is going to be our bass track. I'm going to label it as such. So yeah, let's get this bass line laid down. That's a wrap. As you can see, there's a lot here, because like I said, we keep this thing on loop, and you just keep on recording, and it rolls like tape, basically. So we got this whole line here of recorded bass. And now the task at hand, which is not necessarily an easy one, is to listen to all of this and then go through and, pick out the stuff that sounds good. You might listen, maybe you say, ugh, I hate that first note. It's just terrible. So, you take out that first note. Maybe this first part right here is going to be the jam for you. So you put that there, and that's just an example of what I mean. So obviously there's a million things here. At one point or another, I switched over to finger picking right about here when this is all blown out. That's the first finger pick note. So you're going to have a lot of different variety to choose from. But that's cool. I can rotate things around and copy and paste things together and make a pretty unique bass line out of this. So I'm going to briefly go over a technique that I like to do with the bass, and that basically involves duplicating the bass and separating the two, one of them being a sub bass and the other being a mid-high bass. That way I can have individualized control over both of them, applying different amounts of sidechain compression and EQ to each one. So here, basically hit Command D to duplicate, and then on the bottom one, change the transpose down -12 semitones so that it's one full octave below. Having to make necessary adjustments to each one. So this one has the sidechain compression and brought in an EQ8. Basically transforming that into a sharp low-pass filter, so that the only thing you're getting out of that particular track are the very, very low sub-frequencies. And then on the other track, we do the opposite.
bring in an EQ8 and turn that one into a high pass filter. What I'm trying to do here is basically have the cutoff points at more or less the same area. So if I'm going to cut off the low pass filter at 100 Hertz, then I want the high pass filter to also cut off around 100 Hertz. One other thing I'm going to do is adjust the sidechain compressor on the bass track that is pitched down an octave. I'm going to make different adjustments on the compressor than I would on the mid to high bass track. Basically, on the pitched down bass track, I can bring the threshold down way more and have far more gain reduction going on, since that channel is mostly taking care of all of the really low frequency stuff. So at this point, I'm almost ready to go in and pick out the final bass parts and edit them all together into one. Before I do that though, I want to create a bass bus for this. So basically I just need to go and open up a new audio track. Of course we want to name it appropriately, bass bus. We gotta send both of these, instead of to the master, send it to bass bus. And then click in. Now both of these tracks are going into that one track, and we can now EQ that track in an effort to blend the two separate ones together and make it sound like one again. After this is done, then we'll be ready to go through, listen to all of the different takes, and decide on which ones will be the final ones. I'm gonna go in here and just make a couple more adjustments, just some basic level adjustments. Sometimes it helps to just mute certain things so you can really get a good idea of how other elements sound together.
as you can see, I'm going through and listening to the different takes now. I think what would probably be a good idea is to drag this audio over to the right and then pull it out so that I have the full scope of every single take, and then I can start dragging it over one take at a time, really listening to each one so I can figure out which ones I want to keep. Okay, so I've got the audio, moved it over to the right, and then dragged it all the way out to the left, and now I gotta just line it up. Make sure that they're lined up. Put that one in there on the one, and then that one. So when I'm done listening to this segment, then I can go highlight the one to the right of it, drag that over into the loop, and listen to that one. Since this is just basically a process of me having to listen to these parts and choose, I think it's probably a good time for me to just fast forward. What you're seeing here is about 15 minutes condensed into 15 seconds. Alright, so we basically laid down a baseline, and there's a lot of usable things in there, and a lot of things that aren't so usable, but I found a section that will work for now. I overheard the microphone picking up the room noise and decided to record that because it does add some kind of ambience, or even kind of like reminded me of a bit of tape hiss. And then at one point I could hear myself breathing. I did like an exhale, and I decided to keep that, and that's here. As a last minute idea for an outro, I was kind of thinking to put some ping pong delay on this and probably automate this dry wet knob. Right about here is where I think a good ending point would be. And I like having the bass go over it the whole time, but it also needs to end with it at the same time. And there's a point in this bass where it does a slide down the neck. I need to have that line up with the ending here more, so probably gonna have to edit this bass. That makes for kind of a cool little outro. Just gonna make some slight adjustments to these drums real quick. far. I don't think this is going to be the final arrangement, but I mean, it's not too bad as it is. Starts at 18, ends at around 22. It's roughly 4 minutes right there. It's a long time. I might have to end up chopping off some of this intro, or the outro, I should say. But I actually didn't get to the whole point of this video, which was I was going to add some guitar over it, but we'll go ahead and do that on the next video. I think that this one's gone on long enough. All these little minor edits to random little things like voices, breathing. So we built the drums, we added a bass line, got our sample warped here, added some little effects here using my voice and the room sound from a microphone. I felt like it was kind of lacking maybe some more melody. I was thinking of like making a A part and a B part, because as of right now it's just kind of like a loop. So I got the bright idea of adding some guitar to it. So if you do live instrumentation, maybe this thing might help in some sort of way. If you strictly program beats and you don't do live stuff, maybe it'll still be interesting to watch, or maybe I'll do something here that will still be able to benefit you in some way. So I've more or less rehearsed a guitar part. I don't have it completely written out and memorized, but I have a rough idea of what I want to do. I have opened a instance of Guitar Rig here on this track, and gonna go through that and kind of get some cool sounds. So with all that said, let's get started. So I found a nice clean sound, and then basically used this LFO here to automate the volume in order to give it that classic kind of tremolo sound. I'm just going to go in and make a few more small adjustments. This yellow auto filter helps to add a little bit of that wah-wah sound. And up here is the amplifier simulation section. I can adjust this to make changes to the overall sound. Up on the top here is the master output level. I'm going to just adjust this and turn on the limiter button, and then I can make adjustments to the actual track volume. The last thing I'm going to adjust is this LFO. I want the volume cutoff to be really sharp so that it becomes quite drastic.
this point here, I actually let it loop a few times more so that I could record multiple takes, and that way I could have plenty of material to choose from afterwards. Basically, I can use all of the material that I recorded to edit together one full piece. Any spots where I made mistakes or hit the wrong note, I can get rid of and replace that with the correct part. At this point, I go in and I listen to all the takes and I choose the material that I like the best. Make sure that I have one whole completed section that I'm satisfied with. And then I repeat that process and get a second section that I'm satisfied with. That way I have two different parts.
So in my mind, we have an A part and a B part.
So at this point, all that there's really left for me to do is to arrange this thing. And I'm not going to make a video on that because it would be pretty boring to watch, and it's also purely subjective. Like, you might choose to arrange it in a completely different way than I would. On top of that, the last tutorial like this that I made has a portion where I covered arrangement. So I'll link to that here if you're really interested. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and share and comment and subscribe to the channel for more tutorials like this and also original music.